Hi, and welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. I am Allysia, and I am back from my break. So all of the videos that you've seen in the last month or so have been pre-recorded, but now I'm finally back in real time again. A little bit groggy with having a baby and all that. If you want to learn more details about that, definitely visit my vlog channel. But anyway, that's all an aside. So what today's video is about is the 4 stages of learning and why you think that you suck at piano. So the 4 stages of learning is a really interesting theory that I find really easy to apply and understand, and hopefully it'll give you a little bit of insight into your own piano journey. So we're going to go through each of the 4 stages one by one, talk about how it's relevant, and then put it all together. So let's get started. In this theory, the 4 stages are as follows. You got number 1, unconscious incompetence, which is you don't know what you don't know. We got number 2, second stage, conscious incompetence, which is you know what you don't know. And then we have number 3, conscious competence. You're pretty good, but you have to think about it. This is you know what you know. And then finally, we have unconscious competence, which is you're good and you don't have to think about being good. You are on autopilot. What we're going to do is discuss each of these stages in more depth, which will hopefully give you a deeper understanding into your own learning process. It'll also give you an idea on why you think that you're not good at piano, which is a trap that most adult beginners fall into. And it's a trap that often causes people to quit. The first stage is unconscious incompetence, or I don't know what I don't know. This is the beginning phase of learning any new skill. Everyone starts here with no exceptions. At this stage, you basically have no idea how to set goals for learning the skill since you have no idea what to actually learn. You're completely in the dark and without a roadmap. At this stage, you're going to be making lots of mistakes. And even worse than that, you're not even going to know that you're making mistakes. So at this stage, a lot of beginners get really discouraged because they're not sure why they can't do what they hear, and just kind of take it personally, like they think it's because they're no good. And this is often a stage where you're going to find beginners giving up or quitting. They may say, I want to learn piano. They spend a couple weeks trying it and then just completely give up because there's so much overwhelm and just, feeling bad about themselves for not being able to do what they think they should be able to do. In piano, I see this manifest in several ways. You might be reading notes and rhythms incorrectly without realizing it. You might hear, or a student might hear me play their piece and say something like, how do you make it sound so much better than me? And one thing I might see is a lack of progress because the student can't hear or see the problem. Like maybe they're playing the rhythm wrong, but they don't know. Brushing off a particular skill because they can't see how it matters, like a student ignoring scales or not practicing sight reading. It just seems superfluous. The important thing to realize here in stage 1 is that this is just all a part of the process and everyone goes through it. At first, you might feel like you're just floating in outer space, but eventually you should start to develop a sense of getting your footing. You just have to be patient. If you're in this stage, it's also a really, really good idea to have a piano teacher. I say that anyway because I'm a piano teacher, so I have that bias, but it's, I think, especially critical in the very beginning because you won't be able to pinpoint the things that you're doing wrong at first unless, I don't know, you're just really, really self-aware, but it's hard for most people to do that. So piano teacher in the early stages is going to help you avoid bad habits. Next is stage 2, conscious incompetence, also known as I know what I don't know. In my opinion, this is the most challenging phase and where most people throw up their hands in the air and quit. This is where self-esteem plummets and people will declare, I suck at piano. See, at least when you're in the beginner phase, most people can be a beginner and be comfortable being a beginner. Most people don't expect to know anything when they start out, so they're comfortable having a piano teacher show them the ropes. They feel okay with knowing very little. But the problem happens is when they start to become aware of their own shortcomings. At this point, the student can see the territory a little bit more clearly. They can tell that they're hitting notes wrong. They can tell that the rhythm's not quite right. And maybe, their musicality isn't where they hear that it should be. They can tell that all these mistakes are happening now. It's like the light's been turned on to their shortcomings. And this can be extremely frustrating for the ego because you can see all of these problems, but you don't necessarily have the skills or knowledge to fix them. It's one thing to make mistakes and not know it, but it's another thing entirely to make mistakes and to know it. So that's why I think this is actually the most common stage for people to give up on learning their skill, such as piano, completely, because it's in this stage where people tend to think that, oh, I'll never be able to do this. So stage 1 is the beginner stage. Then this here, stage 2, would be the intermediate stage. Some common signs of stage 2 are the following. The feeling that you're getting worse instead of getting better, since you notice so many mistakes. You're probably just making as many mistakes as you used to, but now you're actually noticing them. A feeling of overwhelm, which is caused because the more you know, the more you realize there is to know. So it's not just about the notes. You start to notice there's so much more musicality involved in playing the piano. There's all these little subtle shadings that you need to pay attention to. There's wanting to quit because the learning process seems so vast and you feel like you've barely scratched the surface. You feel like you've barely made any progress. But on the positive side, there are a couple good things that start happening here. You start to see the value in certain skills, like scales and sight reading. You start to see why they actually matter. And you're also, at this stage, able to practice more deliberately, since you're more able to pinpoint your weaknesses. You're not just flailing around in the dark. If you find yourself in this stage, it's really, really important to not be too hard on yourself. You have to remember, if you can tell that you're making mistakes, it means that you've already made significant progress along your learning journey. You're not, at square one if you can tell that you are doing things wrong. Being able to observe your flaws is just a sign that lots and lots of growth is happening, and soon you're going to be able to move into that stage of competence, which is stage 3. Then we have stage 3, or conscious competence. This is where you do know what you know. So stage 1 is beginner and stage 2 is intermediate. Stage 3 could be considered the proficiency stage. You're finally competent. But this competence requires a lot of conscious effort. You have to work really hard to make your music sound good, and you're probably still making a few mistakes. If you've ever worked really hard on a piece, gotten pretty good at it to the point where maybe even when you're playing through it, sometimes you can do it with no mistakes, but then you sit down to perform it, even if it's just for a friend or a family member, you completely bomb it, then you know what stage 3 is like. Stage 3 is when you are good at something enough to be able to play it without mistakes sometimes, but not so good that you're on autopilot. Some features of stage 3 are being able to play something well, but only with lots of concentration and focus. Feeling like what you're playing is really challenging, really difficult. So this is something where I see students hold tension in their body, or they'll hold their breath in difficult passages. This is where you might start feeling stuck in your skills. And again, this is where, as a side note, I talk about piano teachers a lot because I am one, but this is where piano teachers are useful because they are able to objectively pinpoint what specific areas you need to work on in order to move on to the next level, which in this model or theory would be level 4. If you're in this stage, the best thing that you can do is practice deliberately and practice consistently. Consistent practice is obviously important because that's how you're going to get to that point of being able to play on autopilot, but so is deliberate practice. So say, for example, you playing a piece and you play it all the way through as your practice, but maybe there were a few spots when you played it all the way through where there were mistakes. Maybe one spot is a little trill that you messed up. Maybe another spot is a fast 5-note passage that you bombed. The tendency is to just kind of like play the whole piece through and say, that's good enough, I'll stop now, as opposed to homing in on those little tiny micro issues, which is what you need to do in this phase to be able to pass into autopilot. And finally, we arrive at stage 4, which is unconscious competence. This stage can also be called mastery. It's when your skills go on autopilot and they become effortless. At this point, you can play at a high level, kind of like stage 3. Like stage 3, you're already pretty good. But at stage 4, you don't have all of the stress and strain that you have in stage 3. Hitting stage 4 is when playing a piece or a scale or any other skill becomes truly freeing and enjoyable. You can kind of just sit back and let the magic happen. Some features of this stage are making very few mistakes, even under pressure, such as performance. The stage 4 skill can be multitasked. So if you're playing a piece and all of a sudden there's like a loud noise, it won't throw you off. It won't like make you have to restart completely. You can kind of focus even with a distracting background. Or if you're getting lost in your thoughts, sometimes when you're playing and your mind starts to wander, you're less likely to veer off course if that happens to you. You understand what you're doing well enough to be able to teach it, and playing a particular skill, whether it's reading music, whether it's playing something like a piece of music, it'll start to feel instinctual, not intellectual. The important thing to remember in stage 4 is that you can't just sit back and rest on your laurels. You can't learn something, get your skill developed to this high point, and then say, I'm done, don't need to practice anymore. Otherwise, you're going to find that your skills start backsliding. They're no longer going to be on autopilot, and you'll start kind of going backwards into level 3 again. I want to note that these 4 stages of learning can be applied to your piano journey as a whole, but it can also apply to individual skill sets. And we've kind of been talking about this throughout this video. You could apply these 4 stages of learning to a specific piece that you're working on, or maybe just a specific part of piano learning, such as sight reading, ear training, scales, arpeggios, triads, those kinds of technical exercises, reading rhythms and playing quickly, and etc. It's very likely that you are much more advanced in specific areas than other areas. So for example, I have taught many students who have really well developed ears and they can pinpoint melodies and chords and kind of jam out on their own easily, but they have very poor sight reading and rhythm reading and note reading skills. These people might be able to, have level 3 or 4 ear playing skills, but their comprehension and reading might be a level 1 or 2. I think it's really important to pinpoint where your weak spots are and work on them so that you're more of a balanced musician. The temptation is going to be to completely avoid the things that you're weak at, and I encourage you not to do that. Don't be afraid of your weak spots. Try to face them head on and you'll ultimately be more balanced. So to quickly recap the 4 stages of learning, we have unconscious incompetence. This is where you're a complete beginner. You have no idea what to learn. You're making lots and lots of mistakes, but you don't know how to tell that you're making mistakes. Next, we have conscious incompetence, where most people are ending up giving up. You can see your mistakes, and this is where you really start to feel like you suck at piano, because you see the mistakes, but you can't necessarily overcome them yet. Until you move into conscious competence, which is where you've eliminated most of your mistakes and you're pretty good at the piano, or whatever skill it is, but you need to think really, really hard. You have to put in a lot of effort to be able to be competent. Finally, we have unconscious competence, which is where your skills are developed to the point where they start to go on autopilot. This is the level of mastery when playing piano or whatever skill it is you're working on becomes intuitive. And that is all for today's video. Hopefully you found something valuable here that you can apply to your own learning process. Let me know in the comments if you have anything to share in regards to this, if you have any feedback, stuff like that. You can feel free to visit me on social media sites like Twitter, Instagram. I'll have all that linked in the card below. And check out the description bar for the links to the blog and the link to our Patreon page. I'll catch you in the next video. Next is stage 2, which is conscious incompetence. Oh, whoops, that's wrong. I'm on the wrong one.